The coins hit the wooden table with a sound like a gunshot, scattering across the rough-hewn surface and rolling off the edge into the dust. Celia Bell stood frozen behind her flower stand, her hands trembling around a bundle of wild columbines, staring at the mountain of silver dollars that Andrew Thatcher had just slammed down in front of her. The entire population of Dusty Creek, Texas, seemed to hold its collective breath. The year was 1878, and on this sweltering August afternoon, something was happening on the main street that nobody would forget. "That is every flower you have," Andrew said, his voice low and rough as gravel dragged across dry earth. "Every single one. Every last stem, every last bloom, every last broken pot and rusted tin bucket you have behind that table. I am buying all of it." Celia's throat tightened. "You cannot be serious." "I never say anything I do not mean." She looked at the coins, then back at his face, that broad, weathered, unreadable face beneath the brim of his dark hat. Andrew Thatcher was not a man who smiled easily, or often, or perhaps at all. He was 34 years old and built like the land he owned, hard and unyielding, and shaped by decades of relentless weather. The Thatcher Ranch spread across 4,000 acres north of town, and everyone in Dusty Creek knew his name and feared his temper and respected his silence. "If I sell you everything," Celia said slowly, her voice dropping to something barely above a whisper, "I will have nothing left to sell. I will have no reason to stay." "That," Andrew said, his dark eyes holding hers without flinching, "is precisely the problem I am trying to solve." The words landed on her like a brand. For 3 weeks, Celia Bell had been setting up her modest flower stand every morning on the corner of Main Street and Harper Lane, selling bundles of wildflowers she gathered at dawn from the meadows east of town. For 3 weeks, she had been sleeping in the back room of the boarding house that Mrs. Hargrove rented cheaply to travelers passing through, and for 3 weeks she had been planning to leave. Everyone in Dusty Creek knew she was leaving. She had told Mrs. Hargrove. She had told the postmaster when she sent her last letter back east. She had told the livery man to have her horse and wagon ready by Friday morning. This was Wednesday. She had 2 days left in this town, and now a gruff, infuriating rancher was standing in front of her flower stand with a fortune in silver dollars, trying to buy her reason for staying. The crowd around them stirred. Someone coughed. A child tugged at her mother's skirt. The afternoon sun beat down without mercy on the dusty street. "You cannot buy a person's future," Celia said. "I am not buying your future," Andrew replied. "I am buying your flowers. What you do next is entirely your own choice." But they both knew it was not that simple. Nothing about the past 3 weeks had been simple, and nothing about the complicated, painful, undeniable pull between Celia Bell and Andrew Thatcher had ever been simple from the very first moment they had crossed paths. She had arrived in Dusty Creek on a Tuesday morning in late July, her wagon loaded with traveling trunks and 2 wooden crates filled with flower seeds, bulbs, and the simple tools of her trade. She was 26 years old, dark-haired and sharp-eyed and tired in a way that went deeper than the long road from San Antonio had made her. She was running. Not from the law, not from a husband, but from a life that had collapsed around her so completely that she had gathered what remained and pointed her horse west, because west was the direction that people went when they had nowhere particular left to go. Her mother had died the previous winter. Her father had died 3 years before that. The small flower shop that her mother had kept on a narrow street in San Antonio had been sold to cover debts that Celia had not known existed, until the lawyer came with his papers and his apologetic expression, and his list of numbers that added up to nothing left. She had packed her seeds and her tools and her mother's recipe for rose water, and she had left San Antonio on a cold January morning, drifting from town to town, selling flowers wherever she could, working towards something she could not name. By the time she reached Dusty Creek in late July of 1878, she had been traveling for 6 months and had nearly decided to stop running. But Dusty Creek was a rough little town, sunbaked and wind-scoured, and the people in it were careful with strangers the way people in hard country always were. She was not sure she could build anything permanent here. She was not sure she could build anything permanent anywhere. She had set up her stand on that first Tuesday, and within an hour she had her first customer. He had not looked like a man who bought flowers. He was walking down the middle of Main Street with the purposeful, ground-eating stride of someone who had spent his whole life covering large distances on foot and horseback. And he stopped dead when he saw her table. He stared at the flowers for a long moment, and then he looked at her, and she met his gaze and felt something she could not immediately account for, like the sudden drop of barometric pressure before a storm, like the moment when you step off solid ground and discover there is still a step remaining. "How much for the whole lot?" he said, not a question. He said it the way he might say anything flatly as a statement. "Good morning to you too," Celia said. Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile, an acknowledgement perhaps that she had made a point. "Good morning," he said, and the words came out stiff and deliberate, like he had to remember how to arrange them properly. "The whole lot is not for sale," she told him. "People buy individual bundles. I sell what I have and use the money to buy breakfast." He looked at the flowers again. She had arranged them carefully on the table, the way her mother had taught her, by color and height, the taller stems at the back, the small clustered blooms in front. She had Indian paintbrush and bluebonnets and prickly poppy and what she called prairie stars, small white flowers that grew in dense patches near the creek bed. She had tied them into bundles with strips of cotton cloth she cut from an old shirt. "How much for one bundle?" he said. 5 cents. He reached into his vest pocket, produced a nickel, and set it on the table without touching her hand. He picked up a bundle of bluebonnets and looked at it for a moment, then set it back down. "I do not need flowers," he said. "Then why did you just buy one?" "I do not know," he said. And that was the most honest thing she had ever heard a man say, delivered in that flat, dry voice without any particular emotion, and she found herself watching him walk away down the street with the bundle of bluebonnets hanging from one large, calloused hand, wondering who he was and why he had bought flowers he did not need. She asked Mrs. Hargrove that evening. "Andrew Thatcher," the older woman said immediately, as if there were only one possible person it could be. She was setting out supper in the boarding-house dining room, her movements efficient and practiced. "Biggest rancher in the county. Owns the land north of town all the way to the ridge. Raises cattle mostly. Came out here about 12 years ago from somewhere back east, bought the land from old Celia's croft, worked it himself until he could afford to hire hands. He has got maybe 8 or 9 men working for him now, does not say much, does not cause trouble, pays his debts." "Is he married?" Mrs. Hargrove paused with a bowl of boiled potatoes halfway to the table. "Was," she said. "His wife passed. It will be 4 years ago this coming October. Fever took her. They did not have children." She set the bowl down. "He has not been the same since. He was not what you would call warm before, but after a leaner died he went cold as January. Comes to town for supplies, handles his business, goes home. That is all." Celia thought about the man walking down the street with bluebonnets hanging from his hand. "That is sad," she said. "It is the West," Mrs. Hargrove said, which was her way of saying that sadness was not a surprising condition out here. Over the next several days, Andrew Thatcher came back to the flower stand. He did not always buy anything. Sometimes he simply stopped, looked at the arrangements, and moved on. Once he told her without preamble or context that the prairie stars she had arranged in a tin bucket looked better than the ones she had tied in bundles. She had stared at him. Then she had moved the prairie stars from the bundle into a better display because he was right, and it bothered her that he was right. On the 4th day he said, "You are not from here." "Obviously," she said. "Where are you from?" "San Antonio." "Long way." "Yes," she said. He looked at her with those dark, unreadable eyes. "What are you running from?" The directness of it knocked the breath out of her. She had expected the polite circling that most people did, the careful social dance of inquiring without actually asking. Andrew Thatcher apparently did not do social dances. My mother died, she said, because something in his bluntness demanded honesty in return. I lost the shop. I lost everything that was familiar. I am not running from something exactly. I am running towards something I have not found yet. He was quiet for a moment. The street noise moved around them, horses and wagon wheels and voices, the ordinary music of a small town going about its business. I understand that, he said finally. He bought 2 bundles of flowers that day. He walked away without looking back. She thought about him that night, lying on the narrow cot in her room at Mrs. Hargrove's boarding house, listening to the sounds of the town settling into darkness. She thought about the way he had said, "I understand that," as if those 3 words contained an entire history. She thought about a leaner Thatcher, dead 4 years of fever, and a man who had gone cold as January in response. She thought about her own cold months, the hollow winter after her mother's death, the way she had moved through the days like she was walking underwater. She told herself that she was not staying in Dusty Creek. She told herself this firmly and clearly, the way she had been telling herself for 3 weeks. The town was too small. The market for flowers was too thin. She needed a larger place, somewhere with more people and more trade, maybe Colorado, maybe further west. She had a loose plan, assembled from rumors and second-hand accounts, to eventually reach Denver, where there was reportedly a thriving commercial district and opportunities for small merchants. She told herself all of this, and then she thought about dark eyes and bluebonnets, and I understand that, and she fell asleep later than she had intended. The second week brought complications. Hector Bowman arrived in Dusty Creek. Hector Bowman was a land agent from Austin, sharp-faced and expensively dressed in a way that looked wrong in a dusty frontier town, like a city predator operating in unfamiliar territory. He arrived on a Wednesday with 2 hired men and a portfolio of documents that he carried everywhere with great ceremony. He took the best room at the hotel, which was 3 rooms better than the boarding house, and he began making inquiries about land. Celia first noticed him on Thursday morning when he stopped at her flower stand and bought nothing, only examined her display with a critical expression that made her feel she was being appraised rather than observed. "Pretty little setup," he said. "How long have you been here?" "A week and some days," she said. "Planning to stay?" "I have not decided," he smiled. It was a smile that knew too much and offered too little. "Might be a good idea to move along," he said pleasantly. "Town might be getting a little crowded." She had no idea what he meant. She found out 2 days later when she overheard a conversation at the general store between 2 of the town's older men. The conversation, whispered but not quiet enough, concerned the fact that Hector Bowman was apparently here on behalf of a land consortium from Austin that had an interest in acquiring property around Dusty Creek. Not ranch land, not farm land, but the town lots themselves, the commercial properties along Main Street, including the corner where Celia had been setting up her stand and which was owned, she now learned, by the Thatcher Ranch. Andrew Thatcher owned several of the town lots, apparently having bought them years ago as a precaution or an investment, and the consortium wanted to buy him out and develop them. She did not know what this had to do with her, until Mrs. Hargrove explained it that evening with the directness of a woman who believed that people deserved to know when trouble was coming. "Bowman has been to see Andrew," Mrs. Hargrove said. "Offered him a very large sum for the corner lot where you have been setting up, and the 2 adjacent properties. There are people saying Andrew might take the offer." Celia felt the floor shift under her slightly. "He would sell the lot I use. He would have every right to. It is his property. You have been using it by good grace, no formal arrangement." "I see," Celia said. "There is more," Mrs. Hargrove said, and her voice carried something that was not quite warning, not quite sympathy, but a combination of the 2. "Bowman has been asking about you, why you are here, how long you are staying, what your business is. He does not like variables. He likes things to go cleanly." "I am a flower seller," Celia said. I am not a variable. In a man like Bowman's thinking, any person who does not belong to the plan is a variable, Mrs. Hargrove said. Celia went to bed that night with a cold knot in her stomach. She had been fooling herself, she thought, lying in the dark. She had been letting herself drift into a false comfort, selling flowers on a man's property without permission, telling herself she was only passing through while some stubborn, quiet part of her had begun to imagine something else. Something rooted, something that lasted. She made her decision by morning. She would leave Friday as she had originally planned. She would pack her things Thursday night, have the wagon ready, and be gone before dawn. There was no reason to stay. There was no guarantee of a future here, and staying because of a gruff, silent rancher who bought flowers he did not need was not a reason. It was a feeling. Feelings were not plans. She told Mrs. Hargrove Thursday morning. She told the livery man Thursday afternoon. And Thursday evening, sitting behind her flower stand in the long golden light of late afternoon, counting the remaining blooms she would not bother to gather fresh in the morning, she felt something watching her. She looked up and Andrew Thatcher was standing across the street, not moving, just looking at her with that dark, steady gaze that she had stopped being able to read because it had too many layers. He crossed the street. He stopped in front of her table. "I heard you are leaving in the morning," he said. "That is correct," she said. He looked at the flowers. He looked at her. He put his hands in his pockets and looked at the sky for a moment as if it might tell him something useful. Then he looked back at her and said, "Do not go." The two words landed with the weight of something much larger. She could hear what it cost him to say them, this man who was careful with words the way other men were careful with money, who measured everything he said and released only what was necessary. 2 words from Andrew Thatcher were a speech from anyone else. "I have no reason to stay," she said. Her voice was steadier than she felt. "You could find one," he said. "That is not how reasons work." He was quiet for a long moment. "You need a better lot for your stand," he said finally. "The corner I have been letting you use floods in heavy rain. The one on the east side of Harper Lane gets better light, more foot traffic from the hotel side." She stared at him. "You are talking about property." "I am talking about a better location for your business." "My business," she said carefully, "is mobile. I put it on a wagon and drive it to the next town when I leave here." Something shifted in his face. Not pain exactly, more like a man who had just confirmed something he had feared. He nodded once slowly as if accepting a verdict. "I see," he said, and he turned to go. "Andrew," his name came out of her before she had decided to speak. He stopped but did not turn immediately, and she had 3 full seconds to wonder what she was doing. When he did turn, she said, "Why do you want me to stay?" "Honestly, not about property or locations. Honestly." The silence stretched long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "Because when I come to town and you are not there, the street looks the same as it did before you arrived, and I have begun to find that I prefer it with you in it." She sat with that for a long moment. The afternoon light was going amber and soft, the way it did in late August just before the heat broke for the evening, and Andrew Thatcher stood in front of her flower stand looking like a man who had just said something that frightened him. "That is the most words I have heard you say at once," she said softly. "It is," he agreed. "I will think about it," she said. He nodded and walked away. She watched him go and pressed her hand flat against the table and told her heart to be quiet, because her heart had been wrong before and it would be wrong again, and this was not the moment to start trusting it. But she did not pack her trunk that night. Friday morning came and went without a wagon at the livery being prepared. The livery man saw her at her flower stand at 7 in the morning, shrugged philosophically, and gave her horse an extra portion of oats. Hector Bowman noticed she had not left. He came to her stand late Friday morning with his practiced smile and his city shoes and his quality that was not quality at all but only appearance. "Still here," he said. "Still here," she agreed pleasantly. "I thought you were moving on." "I changed my mind." Something tightened behind his smile. "Miss Bell, I will be direct with you. I am here on business that involves the properties in this immediate area. Your presence here on a lot that is currently under negotiation creates a complication. I would like to offer you something for your consideration." He reached into his vest and produced 2 folded bills, $20. It was a significant sum. "For your trouble," he said, "for the inconvenience of finding a different location." Celia looked at the money. She looked at him. She thought about what Mrs. Hargrove had said about variables. "Are you offering me money to leave?" she said. "I am offering compensation for relocation," he said smoothly. "That is the same thing with different words." She met his eyes steadily. "I appreciate the offer, but no thank you." His smile cooled by several degrees. "That is a decision you may find you regret," he said. "I have found that people who say things like that are usually the ones who end up with regrets," she said. He left. She watched him go with her heart hammering, and her hands very still on the table. She had just refused $20, which was more than she made in a month of flower sales, and she had done it on instinct and stubbornness, and something else she could not name yet but suspected had dark eyes, and a habit of buying flowers he did not need. She needed to talk to Andrew. She found him that afternoon, or rather he found her, appearing at the stand around 2 o'clock with the look of a man who had been thinking all day and had arrived at something. He did not open with pleasantries. She had learned by now that he did not do pleasantries. "Bowman came to see me again this morning," he said. "He increased his offer." "He came to see me too," she said. "He offered me $20 to relocate." Andrew's expression shifted. "He offered you money." "To leave," she said. "I refused." He looked at her for a moment. "Why?" The question was direct and deserved a direct answer. "Because I am not going to be pushed off a street corner by a land agent with a city suit and a portfolio of other people's plans," she said. "And because I decided yesterday that I am not leaving. I do not entirely understand why I decided that, but I decided it, and I do not unmake decisions easily." Something happened in Andrew Thatcher's face then. Not a smile exactly, but the precursor to one, the loosening of some deep-set tension around his eyes and jaw, as if a cord that had been wound tight for a very long time had given a fraction. "Good," he said. "I need to know about the lot," she said. "Bowman says it is under negotiation, is it?" "He wants it," Andrew said. "I have not agreed to sell." "Would you?" She watched his face carefully. "If it comes to that, would you sell it to him?" He held her gaze. "No," he said. "Why not?" "Because I know what men like Bowman do to places like Dusty Creek," he said. "I have seen it. They come in with money and plans, and they rebuild everything to suit themselves and leave when the money runs out, and what is left is worse than what was there before. I have owned that corner lot for 8 years. I am not selling it to a consortium from Austin." "There might be legal pressure," she said. "I have heard that land consortiums in Texas sometimes use the courts." "Let them." He said it with absolute, unadorned certainty. She realized she believed him. This was a man who had built 4,000 acres out of raw land through 12 years of unrelenting work, who had faced drought and cattle disease and the 1,000 ordinary disasters of frontier life, and had not bent. Hector Bowman was a nuisance. He was not to Andrew Thatcher a threat. "All right," she said. "Then I will stay for now." "For now," he repeated, and she heard the question under it. "I need to see what there is here," she said honestly. "I need to understand what I am staying for before I commit to it." He nodded. It was a fair answer, and he recognized it. "Then stay and look," he said. "I will not push." He was as good as his word. For the next week he did not push. He came to the flower stand most days, sometimes buying, sometimes only stopping to look, and slowly, incrementally, he began to talk. Not about anything urgent. He talked about the ranch, about the cattle, about the particular challenges of raising longhorns in central Texas in a dry year, about the way the land north of town changed in the autumn when the goldenrod came in and turned the hillsides yellow. He talked in the same flat, economical way he did everything, but she began to hear things between the words, the quiet love for his land, the careful attention he paid to everything around him, the way he noticed details that other people missed. One morning, he told her that the prairie stars she had been using in her arrangements were actually a variety of white aster that bloomed twice a year, once in spring and once in late summer, and that if she knew where to look there was a whole hillside of them about 2 miles northeast of town that most people in Dusty Creek did not know about. He described the location precisely and told her that she was welcome to gather there whenever she liked. The next morning she found the hillside and stood in it for a long time, surrounded by white flowers in the early light, and she understood that he had given her something. Not the flowers themselves, but the knowledge, the secret geography of a place, which was a thing that people shared only when they trusted each other. She brought him a bundle of those asters the following morning. She set them on the table as he approached and said, "For you, no charge." He looked at the flowers. He picked them up. He looked at her with an expression that she was slowly beginning to decode and which she thought might be the closest he came to tenderness. "Thank you," he said. "You showed me where to find them," she said. "You got up before dawn to go gather them," he said. "I always get up before dawn." "I know," he said. "I have seen your lamp in the boarding-house window." She stared at him. "You have been watching my window." He had the grace to look slightly caught out, which was the closest thing to flustered she had ever seen from him. "I ride past the boarding-house on my way to the north pasture most mornings before sunup," he said. "I notice things." "You notice things," she repeated. "I notice your things," he said, and then he seemed to decide that was more than enough revelation for one morning and walked away with his asters. She stood behind her flower stand and laughed for the first time in months. It came out of her sudden and real, not the polite social laugh she deployed in public, but the kind that rises up from somewhere true. A woman passing by gave her a curious look. She did not care. Something was building between them, slow and careful the way everything about Andrew was slow and careful, like a structure being built to last rather than to impress. But it was not without its complications, and those complications arrived with full force on a Tuesday in mid-August, when a man rode into town that nobody in Dusty Creek had been expecting. His name was Thomas Croft, and he was the son of Celia Croft, the man who had originally sold Andrew the land 12 years ago. Thomas Croft was about 40, weathered and bitter in the way of men who had watched their inheritance walk out the door, and he had with him a lawyer and a claim that sent the town buzzing. He was asserting that his father's original sale of the land had been under duress, that Celia Croft had been in debt and had sold for a fraction of fair value, and that the sale should be nullified or renegotiated. The claim had no legal standing. Everyone with knowledge of the law said so immediately. The sale had been recorded and witnessed and was 12 years past. But the lawyer Thomas had brought with him was an Austin man, and he was friends with Hector Bowman, and the two of them together began a campaign of pressure and innuendo that made the next several days in Dusty Creek feel like the air before a lightning strike. Celia heard all of this through Mrs. Hargrove and through the ordinary channels of a small town, and she watched Andrew during this period with a new and focused attention. He did not appear alarmed. He appeared controlled, with the particular controlled quality of a man who has decided that external circumstances will not determine his bearing. He consulted with the town's own lawyer, a careful man named Judge Perry who had handled land law for 30 years. He produced his own documents, properly filed and stamped. He went about his business. But one evening she found him sitting on the bench outside the general store after it had closed in the blue dusk, alone. He looked tired in a way that he did not allow himself to look during the day. He looked like a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had sat down to rest without quite meaning to. She sat down beside him without asking. He did not tell her to go away. "Is it going to be all right?" she asked. "The land claim is frivolous," he said. "Judge Perry says it will be dismissed in the county court." "That is not what I asked." He was quiet for a moment. "Bowman and Croft are working together," he said. "The land claim is not the real threat. It is a distraction. While everyone is paying attention to the claim, Bowman has been quietly acquiring the smaller lots on the south side of town. He does not need my land. He wants to create a situation where I sell voluntarily because the alternatives become unpleasant. What alternatives? If he owns the south side and certain key lots, he can affect the water easements, the road access, the commercial viability of the north side of Main Street. He is building leverage, not a legal case. Celia thought about this. She thought about it with the sharp, practical mind she had developed selling flowers out of a wagon for 6 months, traveling through a dozen towns, watching how things worked in frontier commerce. He needs the corner lot specifically, she said slowly. Your corner lot because it is the pivot point between the north side and the south side. Andrew looked at her. Yes, he said, and my stand is on the corner lot. Yes. So my presence there is actually a problem for him beyond just being a variable, she said. It is an active occupation. As long as I am there and you are supporting my use of the lot, he cannot present his own plans for it. I had not thought of it quite in those terms, Andrew said, but you are correct. I am not going anywhere, Celia said. He looked at her in the dusk, and she felt the full weight of his attention, which was considerable. He was a man who, when he looked at you, looked at all of you. I do not want you to stay because of Bowman, he said. I do not want you to stay as a tactical element in a property dispute. I know that, she said. I have my own reasons. What are they? She was quiet for a moment, looking at the street, at the last strip of orange on the western horizon. I am tired of moving, she said. I have been moving since January and I am very tired. And this town, this particular town, has something in it that I have not found anywhere else. What is that? She turned and looked at him directly. You, she said. The silence that followed that word was enormous. Andrew Thatcher sat very still, and she watched the impact of what she had said move through him like weather moving through landscape, changing the surface of things. He did not say anything for a long time. Then he reached over, very slowly, and took her hand where it rested on the bench between them. He did not say anything. He just held her hand in his large, calloused one, and they sat in the evening dark on the bench outside the general store and listened to the town finish its day around them. That was the beginning of the real thing. The days that followed had a different quality. The tension of Bowman's scheming remained, but it existed at a distance now, behind the more immediate reality of Andrew and Celia becoming something to each other. He began meeting her in the mornings sometimes before she opened her stand, when the town was still quiet and the air was still cool. They walked. He showed her parts of the town she had not seen, the small creek behind the livery with its cottonwood trees, the old mission wall at the south edge of town that dated back 40 years. He showed her the view from the ridge to the north, riding up there one afternoon on 2 borrowed horses, where you could see the whole of the valley spread below, the town, a small cluster of buildings in the vast brown-green of the Texas landscape. He was not easy. She needed to say that clearly to herself and mean it. He was not easy. He went quiet for days sometimes, retreated into a silence so complete that she could not reach him, and she had to learn not to pursue him into it, but to wait at the edge of it until he found his way back. He had a temper, controlled almost always but visible in the set of his jaw and the cold edge that came into his voice when things went wrong. He had walls built from 4 years of grief, and probably from things older than grief, from whatever it was in his past that had made him a man who chose land in Texas over the life back east he had left at 22. She asked him about it one afternoon. They were sitting on the porch of the ranch house, which she had visited for the first time on a Sunday when he had invited her with the characteristically direct non-ceremony of, "Come out to the ranch on Sunday if you want to see how the place looks." The ranch house was not grand. It was a solid, practical building of limestone and wood, added to over the years as the operation grew, functional and well-made but not comfortable in the domestic sense. There were no curtains on the windows. There were no rugs on the floors. It was a house that a man lived in alone and had been doing so for 4 years. "Tell me about back east," she said. He looked at the horizon. "There is not much to tell. "That is never true," she said. He was quiet for a while. Then, "My father had a business, textiles in Philadelphia. He expected me to come into it. I did not want it. I wanted land of my own, open land, something that answered to weather and work rather than to markets and men in offices. He told me I was throwing my life away. I told him I was making it. We did not end the conversation well. I came west at 22 and I have not been back." "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Not the land," he said. "Sometimes the conversation. I wrote to him once when a leaner and I married. He did not reply." She heard the history in those words, the layers of it, the loss and the pride and the stubbornness and the loneliness. She understood all of those things from the inside. "My mother never wanted me to take over the flower shop," she said. "She wanted me to marry someone respectable and move into a proper house. We argued about it for years. I kept the shop open for 6 months after she died because I could not bear to close it, even when I knew I had to, because closing it was admitting she was gone for good." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she felt in that look a recognition that went deeper than attraction, deeper than shared geography. Two people who had both learned the hard way that the things they loved could be taken from them, looking at each other across a porch in the Texas afternoon. He reached over and touched her face. Just once, just his fingers against her cheek, brief and careful as a man touching something he was afraid to break. Then he put his hand back in his lap and looked at the horizon. She felt the touch for the rest of the day. Bowman made his final move on a Wednesday morning in the 3rd week of August, 3 weeks after Celia had arrived in Dusty Creek. He came to her flower stand with his 2 hired men flanking him and his portfolio under his arm, and he was not bothering with pleasantries or $20 bills this time. "I have acquired a formal lease document," he said, producing a paper from the portfolio and laying it on the table over her flowers. "This is an authorized municipal document certifying that this corner property is designated as commercial use only. No temporary or itinerant sales permitted. Your operation is in violation." Celia looked at the document. She looked at him. "Where did this come from?" "The County Commercial Board in Austin." "Dusty Creek does not have a County Commercial Board authorization," she said. "It is an unincorporated township." His smile did not falter. "That status is being reviewed." She needed to think. She kept her face calm and her hands still on the table. "I would like Andrew Thatcher to see this document." "This is between you and the county authority," Bowman said. "Mr. Thatcher's ownership of the lot is a separate matter." "Nevertheless," she said. Bowman's smile finally dropped. "Miss Bell, I am trying to handle this gracefully. You have been an unexpected complication in a business arrangement that has nothing to do with you. I am asking you, one final time, to take your cart and your flowers and move on down the road. I will give you $50. $50. It was enough to get her to Denver with money left over. It was enough to start over somewhere new. It was a significant sum of money, and it was being offered to her by a man with legal documents and hired muscle and the backing of an Austin consortium, and she was a woman alone with a flower stand and a stubborn disposition. She looked at the document again. She looked at Bowman. She thought about Andrew saying, "I notice your things." She thought about, "I am buying your flowers. What you do next is entirely your own choice." She thought about a hand touching her face on a ranch porch in the afternoon, careful as something that mattered. "No," she said. Bowman stared at her. "No," she said again. "I am not leaving. I do not accept your document as valid. I am not taking your $50, and I think you should leave my flower stand now." Bowman leaned forward on the table, and for the first time his voice lost the veneer of pleasantness entirely. "You are making a very serious mistake," he said. "Then it is my mistake to make," she said. And that was the moment, the exact moment, that Andrew Thatcher appeared. He came from the direction of the livery, walking with that long ground-eating stride, and he saw Bowman leaning over Celia's table and the 2 hired men flanking, and something happened in his face that was not cold but actually the opposite, a heat rising up that was controlled but only just. He crossed the street and came to the stand. He looked at Bowman. He looked at the document on the table. He picked it up and read it, and then he put it back down. "Get off my property," he said to Bowman. "Mr. Thatcher, this is a legal matter, and I suggest you consult with your own counsel before." "This document is from the Austin County Commercial Registry," Andrew said, and his voice was absolutely flat. "Dusty Creek is in Caldwell County. Austin County Commercial Registry has no jurisdiction here. This document is meaningless." A small crowd had gathered on the street around them. People in small towns always gathered. Celia had learned, not from malice, but because the drama of public confrontation was part of the social fabric of a place where entertainment was scarce. Mrs. Hargrove was among them. Judge Perry, the town's lawyer, was among them, and he was nodding at what Andrew had just said. Bowman recovered quickly. "The jurisdictional question is exactly what will be reviewed during the incorporation process." "There is no incorporation process," Andrew said. "I spoke with the county sheriff this morning. There has been no petition filed, no process initiated, nothing. You are presenting a fraudulent document to intimidate a woman on my property." The word fraudulent landed on the crowd like a stone on still water, ripples moving outward. Bowman's hired men shifted. Bowman himself went very still. "That is a serious accusation," Bowman said quietly. "You can respond to it in the county court," Andrew said. "Which is where I intend to file a complaint this afternoon regarding both this document and your approach to Miss Bell. Additionally, you can respond to the complaint I am filing regarding your acquisition of the South Side lots using misrepresented commercial designations. Judge Perry," he raised his voice slightly, and the lawyer stepped forward from the crowd, "will you witness what has been said here today?" "I will," Judge Perry said. Bowman looked at the crowd, at the document, at Andrew, and at Celia. He made a calculation. People like Bowman always made calculations. The calculation this time landed on the wrong side of his ledger. He picked up the document from the table, tucked it into his portfolio, and straightened his jacket. "This matter is not concluded," he said. "It is for today," Andrew said. "Get off my property." Bowman left. His hired men followed. The crowd watched them go with the satisfaction of people who have witnessed someone unpleasant get what they deserved. Then people began to drift back to their business, and Dusty Creek's Main Street returned to its ordinary hum. Celia realized her hands were shaking. She put them flat on the table and breathed. Andrew was still standing in front of her stand. He looked at her hands and then at her face. "Are you all right?" he said. "Yes," she said. Then, "No. I am shaking." "It will pass," he said. "I know." She looked at him. "Thank you." "You had already told him no," Andrew said. "I only arrived to reinforce the legal point." "You arrived," she said, "because you were watching." He did not deny it. "I notice your things," she said softly, and the line between them, the careful professional distance they had been maintaining, thinned to almost nothing. He came around the side of the table, which he had never done before, always remaining on the customer's side, the respectful stranger's side. He came around to where she was standing, and he stood very close to her, and he looked at her face for a long moment. "Celia," he said. It was the first time he had used her name. In all the weeks of their acquaintance, all the stops at the flower stand and the evening conversations and the morning walks and the afternoon on the ranch porch, he had never called her by her name. He had called her nothing at all. Hearing it from him now, in that flat, grave voice, was something she had not expected and could not have prepared for. "Yes," she said. "I do not want you to stay because of Bowman or because of property disputes or because you are tired of moving," he said. "I want you to stay because you want to be here, because this is where you choose to be." "I know," she said. "If you do not want to be here." "Andrew," she said, and stopped him. "I want to be here." The silence between them was different from the silences before. It was full rather than empty. It was the silence of two people who have finished saying the necessary things and arrived somewhere real. He kissed her. It was brief and careful and absolutely certain, the way he did everything, and then he stepped back and looked at her with that dark, steady gaze. "Then stay," he said. "I am staying," she said. What happened next between them unfolded over the remaining weeks of August and into September. with the particular quality of something that had been building pressure for a long time and was now allowed to move. Andrew was not demonstrative in public, but the town of Dusty Creek noticed the change anyway. He started eating supper at the hotel dining room on Thursday evenings, which coincidentally was the same evening Celia had supper there, because Mrs. Hargrove did not cook on Thursdays. He started appearing at her stand in the mornings with coffee from the general store, 2 cups, without being asked, and without making a ceremony of it. He fixed the wobbly leg on her display table one morning before she arrived, leaving it repaired without a note. She noticed and did not say anything about it directly, but brought him a bundle of goldenrod the next day, and they both understood what the exchange meant. Bowman left Dusty Creek on the 1st of September, defeated. Judge Perry filed his complaint. Thomas Croft's land claim was dismissed by the county court on the grounds that it had been exactly 12 years, and the statute of limitations had passed. The Austin Consortium withdrew without any fanfare, the way such enterprises always did when they met sufficient resistance, quietly and without acknowledgement that they had ever been there. The South Side lots that Bowman had acquired were eventually sold back at a loss when his operation collapsed. Andrew quietly bought 2 of them, at reasonable prices, and leased them to local merchants. Dusty Creek remained Dusty Creek, and the corner lot at Main Street and Harper Lane remained available for a woman selling wildflowers. On a Friday evening in early September, Andrew drove his wagon to town with a load of lumber in the back. With the help of 2 of his ranch hands, he built a proper wooden stand structure on the corner of the lot, a small enclosed booth with a roof overhang to keep the sun off, and a proper counter and a shelf along the back wall, and a little hand-painted sign that said Bell Flowers in solid, careful letters that she later learned he had painted himself. She stood in the street and looked at it for a long time when she arrived the next morning. He was there, standing beside it, watching her face. "You built me a stand," she said. "You cannot sell flowers out of a wagon forever," he said. "I have been doing exactly that for 6 months. You do not need to any more." She turned and looked at him. "Andrew, this is permanent." "Yes," he said. "You are asking me to put down roots here. I am building you a structure to sell flowers from," he said, with the careful literalness she had come to understand was his way of giving her room to decide things for herself. "What you do with it is your choice." She looked at the stand. She looked at him. She thought about her mother's shop on the narrow street in San Antonio, the smell of roses and soil, and the particular piece of a place that belonged to you. She thought about 6 months on the road in 12 towns, and the exhaustion of impermanence. She walked to the stand and stepped behind the counter and put her hands on the new wood, which was clean and pale and smelled of fresh cutting. She looked out at the street from behind it, the way it would look every morning from here on. "It is good," she said. Andrew let out a breath he had apparently been holding. It was the most vulnerable thing she had ever seen him do. She looked at him. "Come here," she said. He came behind the counter, and she took his face in her hands, the strong, weathered face of a man who had built his life with his own hands, and was now, very carefully, trying to offer some of it to her. She kissed him, properly this time, no brevity, no careful restraint, a kiss that said everything that the 2 of them had been saying obliquely for weeks. When they broke apart, old Mr. Calhoun, who ran the feed store across the street, was watching with an expression of profound satisfaction. "About time," he called over. Andrew looked across the street at him with a flat stare that should have withered anyone. Mr. Calhoun appeared completely unaffected and went back into his store. Celia laughed. She laughed the way she had that first time, real and rising from somewhere true, and Andrew looked at her laughing, and something in his face opened up that had not been open in a long time. Not quite a smile, but the architecture of one, the lines of it settling into his features like a landscape, remembering what it looked like before a long drought. It was a beginning. The weeks that followed were the best she had known in years, perhaps ever. September in Dusty Creek brought cooler air and the goldenrod Andrew had described, and she added it to her arrangements, and it sold well. She expanded her stock, trading seeds with a Mexican woman named Rosario who lived 3 miles south and grew flowers in a proper garden, learning the local blooms she had not encountered before: the Texas mountain laurel with its purple clusters, the fall asters, the late-blooming evening primrose that opened in the long dusk. Bell flowers became known. People came specifically for it. Andrew came every morning with coffee. They had supper together most evenings, sometimes at the hotel dining room, sometimes, when he did not want to be in public, at a table on the ranch porch under the stars, with food that his cook, a taciturn older man named Burl, prepared without asking questions about why there were now 2 place settings. She met his ranch hands, 8 of them, a mixed crew that included 2 men from Mexico, a black man named James who had come to Texas after the war, and whom Andrew treated with the straightforward respect he gave to any skilled man doing good work, and several younger white men who had come west seeking fortunes they would find only in the form of honest wages. They accepted her with the pragmatic neutrality of working men who had other things to occupy their attention, with the exception of a young hand named Caleb who was about 20 and clearly found Celia fascinating, a situation that Andrew handled by assigning Caleb to the most remote pasture on the ranch for 3 weeks. She told Andrew he did not need to do that. He said he disagreed. She did not push the point because it was genuinely a little funny. She stopped lying awake at night making plans to leave. Instead, she lay awake in her room at the boarding house thinking about the ranch house with its bare windows and bare floors, and about a man who had built her a flower stand and painted the sign himself and was learning, slowly and with great difficulty, how to be something other than alone. She had her own difficulty. She had not told him about Thomas Reed. Thomas Reed was a man she had known in San Antonio, a merchant she had met when her mother's shop was still open. They had been together, briefly and badly, for 8 months before her mother died. Thomas Reed was handsome and charming, and had a hidden temper and a hidden wife in a city 2 states east, and discovering the second fact about him had been one of the 3 worst moments of her life, the other 2 being her father's death and the sale of the shop. She had not been hurt in the way of the dime novels, no dramatic scene, no confrontation, only a letter from the wife in question, carefully factual and devastating in its politeness, and a subsequent conversation with Thomas that had ended with her understanding clearly that she had been fooled by someone who was very practiced at fooling people. It had not made her cynical, exactly, but it had made her careful. It had made her question her own judgments. It had made her wonder through the months on the road whether she was capable of reading people correctly or whether she only saw what she wanted to see. Andrew was not Thomas Reed. She understood this with complete clarity. The more she knew Andrew, the more the differences were obvious: the honesty, the bluntness, the absolute lack of performance or concealment. Andrew Thatcher was not a man who hid things. He was a man who held things, which was different, who carried things privately until he trusted enough to set them down. But she needed to tell him about Thomas Reed, not because it was relevant to what was between them, but because she was building something here, something real and rooted, and she did not want any part of it to rest on omission. She told him on a Sunday evening in early October, sitting on the ranch porch in the golden cool of the autumn dusk. She told him plainly, the way he told things, without flourish or excessive emotion. She told him about Thomas Reed and the 8 months and the wife and the letter. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "He deceived you," Andrew said. "Yes. That is his failure," Andrew said, "not yours. I should have." "No," he said with a certainty that stopped her. "You trusted someone who presented himself as trustworthy. That is not a failure of judgment. That is a betrayal on his part. There is a difference." She looked at him. "You are not angry. Why would I be angry? Some men would be about the past." "The past is not mine to judge," he said. "The present is mine to show up for." She felt something loosen in her chest that she had not known was still tight. She breathed. She took his hand where it rested on the arm of the chair. "I need to tell you something too," he said. She waited. "After Alina died," he said, "I decided I was finished, not in any dramatic way. I did not make a vow or a statement. I simply decided quietly that whatever that part of my life was, it was over, that the ranch was enough, that being alone was better than risking that kind of loss again." He stopped. "I had held to that decision for 4 years, up until July." "July," she said. "You set up a table of flowers on a corner I owned," he said, "and looked at me like I was an inconvenience, and charged me 5 cents for bluebonnets I did not need, and I went home and put those bluebonnets in a glass on the kitchen table and sat there looking at them for most of an evening wondering what was wrong with me." He paused. "I think I knew then. I did not want to know it." "You came back the next day," she said. "I came back the next day," he confirmed. "And every day after that. And every day after that." He turned and looked at her with those dark eyes that she now knew how to read, that she had learned the way you learn a language, slowly and through full immersion. "I am not good at this," he said. "I want you to understand that I know I am not easy. I go quiet when I should talk. I handle problems by myself when I should ask for help. I expect a great deal of the people around me, and I do not always say so. I am telling you these things not as excuses but as information." "I know them already," she said. "I know you do," he said. "I am telling you because I want to ask you something, and I want you to go into it with full information." She was very still. He reached into his vest pocket and produced something that he held in his closed hand for a moment before opening it. It was a ring, a simple gold band with a small inset stone, dark and red. Garnet, she thought. It was not ornate. It was exactly the kind of thing he would choose. "This was my grandmother's," he said. "She wore it for 50 years of marriage to a man who was, by all accounts, very similar to me in temperament, and whom she found adequate to the task of being loved by." He held it in his palm, looking at it. "I am asking you to marry me, Celia Bell. Not because of the flower stand or the corner lot or Bowman or any of it. Because when I come to town and you are there, everything is better, and because I think I can make things better for you too if you let me try." The evening air smelled of grass and coming autumn and the faint smoke of the ranch cook fire. An owl called somewhere in the mesquite trees to the north. The stars were beginning to show. "Yes," she said. He put the ring on her hand. It fit as if it had been waiting. They sat on the porch in the dark for a long time after that, not talking much, which was exactly right. The wedding was in November, when the weather had fully broken, and the air had that clear, rinsed quality of a central Texas autumn. It was a small ceremony, conducted by the traveling Methodist minister who came through Dusty Creek on his quarterly circuit. Mrs. Hargrove provided the wedding supper and cried at the ceremony with the vigorous openness of a woman who had strong opinions about happy endings. Judge Perry witnessed. James and Burl and the rest of the ranch hands came, cleaned up and uncomfortable in their good clothes and visibly pleased in spite of themselves. Old Mr. Calhoun from the feed store was there, and stood in the back with his arms folded and a look of deep satisfaction. Celia wore a dress of dark blue wool that Mrs. Hargrove helped her alter from a traveling dress she had in her trunk. She carried a bouquet she had made herself, goldenrod and white asters and the last of the fall prairie stars, tied with a ribbon of blue silk that Mrs. Hargrove had in her sewing box. She had never, she realized, made a bouquet for herself before. It felt right. Andrew wore his good coat and a fresh shirt and looked as he always looked, serious and contained and absolutely present. And when she walked toward him down the aisle of the small church, he looked at her with an expression she had never seen from him before, an expression without any of the usual careful control, open as landscape, and it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "I do," he said, when the minister asked in the same flat, certain voice with which he said everything, and she understood that for Andrew Thatcher those 2 words carried the same weight as an essay. They went home to the ranch. She had moved her things out of the boarding house that morning, and Mrs. Hargrove had hugged her and told her that she was welcome back any time, as if she expected that marriage would not take. Celia had kissed the older woman's cheek and told her that she intended to make it work, and Mrs. Hargrove had said that she had no doubt of it. The ranch house was bare and functional and smelled of wood smoke and leather, and the particular dry smell of a house that has been inhabited only practically. Celia stood in the main room on their first evening and looked at it, and Andrew stood behind her and watched her looking. "It needs curtains," she said. "Yes," he said, "and a rug in here, if you like, and something on those walls." "Whatever you want," he said. "It is your house." She turned around and looked at him. "It is our house," she said. Something in his face shifted and he took a breath. "Our house," he said, as if trying the words out and finding them extraordinary. "Yes, it is." She kissed him. He held her with the same care and certainty with which he did everything, as if she was something worth being careful with, and also as if he intended to never let go. They built the house together over the winter, not in the sense of construction, though Andrew did add a proper parlor window in December, but in the sense of two lives arranged into a shared space. She brought color to it, curtains of yellow calico for the kitchen and red gingham for the parlor, a braided rug she traded for with Rosario, a collection of pressed flowers she framed and hung in the hallway that Andrew looked at for a long time one morning, and then nodded at, which was his form of approval. He brought her into the ranch, not in the sense of labor, though she helped during the busy seasons without being asked, but in the sense of inclusion. He explained what he was doing and why. He asked her opinion on the kinds of decisions he had previously made alone, not always taking her counsel, but always genuinely considering it. Once, in January, he changed a plan he had been fixed on for 2 weeks because she pointed out a problem with it that he had missed, and he did so without any difficulty or wounded pride, simply with the equanimity of a man who preferred to be correct over being consistent. She found that she loved him not in spite of his difficulty, but including it, the silences and the high standards, and the way he held things privately until he was ready. She found that there was something deeply restful about loving a person who meant every single thing they said, who did not perform emotion or manufacture warmth, but had the real thing underneath all that stone, patient and deep as groundwater. Spring came, and with it the first anniversary of her arrival in Dusty Creek. She marked it privately, sitting behind the counter of Bell flowers in the April morning, running her hand along the wood of the counter that Andrew had built and listening to the town wake up around her. A year ago she had been traveling for months, rootless and tired and looking for something she could not name. She was still there. She was still here. The word had changed everything. In April she found out she was pregnant. She told Andrew on a Tuesday evening at the supper table. She told him directly, without preamble, the way he had taught her by example to tell important things. He stopped eating. He looked at her across the table. He put down his fork. He was quiet for long enough that she began to wonder, briefly, and with a small cold shock, whether she had misjudged how he would receive this, whether this was one of the things he held so privately that she could not reach it. Then he stood up from the table and came around to her side and knelt down beside her chair and took both her hands in his and put his forehead against her hands and did not say anything at all for a long while. "Andrew," she said softly. "Yes," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Yes, I am here. Are you all right?" He lifted his head and looked at her, and she saw it then, the thing behind the stone face and the controlled expression, the thing that Andrew Thatcher kept in the deepest part of himself where the frost could not reach it. Not all right, overwhelmed, happy in a way that was too large for a man as contained as he was to handle quietly. "Yes," he said, and his voice broke slightly on the word and then steadied. "Yes, I am very all right." She put her hand on his face. He turned into it. The months that followed had their difficulties, as all pregnancies did in 1879, in a town without a proper doctor, only a traveling physician who passed through twice a year, and a practical midwife named Alma who had delivered half the children in Caldwell County. Andrew worried more than he showed, which was still visible to her because she had learned to read him. He checked on her more than was strictly necessary. He quietly transferred more of the ranch's physical operations to his hands. He did not tell her to rest or to slow down, but she noticed that heavy things tended to be moved before she got to them. She kept the flower stand open through the summer, because it was her work and her independence and her connection to the town, and because the women of Dusty Creek had taken to Bell flowers in a way that made her genuinely happy, coming for arrangements for weddings and funerals and ordinary Sundays, treating it as a social anchor. Andrew did not suggest she close it. He drove her to town in the wagon on the days when the heat was worst and came to carry things at the end of the day without being asked. She watched him doing this and felt the specific love that comes from being known. Not an extraordinary love, not the love of grand gestures or dramatic speeches, but the love that shows up every morning with 2 cups of coffee and builds a flower stand and knows which wildflowers grow on a hill 2 miles northeast and believes that a person's past is their own and their future is what they make it. Their son was born in November of 1879, on a Tuesday evening when the air was cool and clear, and an owl was calling in the mesquite trees. Alma delivered him without complication, and Andrew sat outside the bedroom door for 6 hours of labor without moving from the chair, which was the most spectacularly unhelpful thing he could have done, and also one of the most moving, because she knew he would have sat there for 6 days if needed. When Alma came out and told him he had a son, he stood up from the chair and went into the room and stood at the bedside looking at Celia and the child with an expression she had never seen on him, and which she thought she might spend the rest of her life trying to adequately describe. Not soft, exactly. Broken open, like a geode cracked apart to show what was always inside. "Hello," he said to the child, in his flat, certain voice, and the child, who was less than an hour old and had very strong opinions about the world, opened his eyes and seemed to locate the voice and settled slightly. And Andrew made a sound that was absolutely not crying because Andrew Thatcher did not cry and also was. She named him William, for no particular reason except that it felt solid and right, a name that could carry weight. Andrew's middle name was William, which she had not known until she told him, and the expression on his face when she said it was something she put carefully in the collection of things she intended to keep forever. William Thatcher grew up on a cattle ranch north of Dusty Creek, Texas, and by the time he was 2 years old he had strong opinions about horses and had learned to say mama and papa, and also the word no with considerable force. He had Andrew's dark eyes and Celia's dark hair, and a temperament that split the difference, curious and determined, and occasionally as silent as his father in ways that made Celia laugh and Andrew look proud. The ranch prospered through the early 1880s. The cattle market was strong in those years, and Andrew was a careful and skilled manager who had learned the particular rhythms of Texas ranching through a decade of hard experience. He added land when it was available at fair prices, extended the herd, improved the water situation on the North Pasture with a series of stock tanks that took 2 summers to build. He was respected in Caldwell County in a way that went beyond the ordinary respect of commerce, the respect that comes from a man who does what he says and says what he means and does not compromise on either. Celia's flower business grew into something more than a corner stand. In 1880, she rented the small building adjacent to the corner lot and opened a proper shop, with a glass-fronted display case that Andrew ordered from a supplier in San Antonio at significant expense, and presented to her on a Monday morning as if it were an ordinary Tuesday delivery. She hired Rosario's daughter Alina to help her, and together they expanded into arrangements for the hotel and the church and the school that had been built the previous year on the south side of town. Bell Flowers became, in its modest way, an institution. She hired an additional woman, Mary, who was a widow with 2 young children and who needed work with a flexibility that most employers could not offer. Celia offered it without discussion, adjusting the schedule around Mary's children's needs. Andrew, hearing about this, added a note to the shop's account at the general store, a quiet and entirely characteristic gesture. In 1882, she became pregnant again. This time she told Andrew earlier, in the third month, sitting at the kitchen table in the morning over coffee. He received the news with the kind of contained joy that she now knew was his version of celebration. A long pause, a deep breath, a hand covering hers on the table and pressing once. "Are you well?" he said. "Completely well," she said. "Good," he said, and then, after a moment, "good" again, as if once was not sufficient. This child, born in October of 1882, was a daughter. They named her Clara, and she arrived in the world with a personality so distinct from her brothers that Celia wondered sometimes how the same parents could produce such different children. Where William was his father's gravity, Clara was Celia's energy, quick and bright and interested in everything, with a laugh that filled whatever room she was in. Andrew was entirely undone by Clara. He tried not to show it and failed comprehensively. Clara was the only person in the world who could routinely make Andrew Thatcher smile, a real full smile, which she accomplished by approximately age 8 months simply by reaching up to grab his nose with her small hand. William, at 3, regarded his sister with the solemn philosophical acceptance of a firstborn presented with an unexpected variable, and then decided she was acceptable. Dusty Creek grew through the early 1880s. The railroad came through in 1883, 30 miles south, which was close enough to affect commerce and far enough not to swamp the town's identity. New families arrived. The school expanded. A second general store opened. The social landscape of the town thickened and complicated in the ways of a place finding its feet. Mrs. Hargrove sold her boarding house in 1883 and moved to San Antonio to live with a sister. And the day she left, Celia hugged her on the street in front of the building that had been her first home in Dusty Creek and thanked her, with genuine feeling, for the room and the Thursday dinners and the information about a gruff rancher who bought flowers he did not need. "I knew from the first week," Mrs. Hargrove said, patting her hand. "Some things you just know." Old Mr. Calhoun was still there, running the feed store at 71, opinionated and immortal. He had taken to William with particular enthusiasm and had taught the boy the names of every horse in the livery by the time William was 4. Andrew bore this with equanimity. James, the ranch hand who had been with Andrew since the early days, became the ranch foreman in 1882, a promotion that Andrew announced with characteristic ceremony, which was to say none at all, simply telling James on a Monday morning that the foreman position was his, and that his wages would reflect it. James accepted with equal directness and proved himself comprehensively over the years that followed. In the winter of 1883, a letter arrived from Philadelphia. Celia found it on the kitchen table when she came in from the shop one afternoon, already opened, which told her Andrew had read it. He was sitting in the parlor chair, the letter in his hand, looking at the cold fire. She sat down across from him and waited. He could speak in his own time about things like this, she had learned. Pushing only drove him deeper. After a while he said, "My father is ill, my brother wrote." She had not known about a brother. He had mentioned Philadelphia and a father. "Not a brother. Is it serious?" she asked. "They believe so." He was quiet again. Then, "I have not spoken to my father in 12 years. She waited. "He did not reply to my letter about Alina," he said. "He did not write when I lost her." The grief behind those words was old and complicated, the grief not just for Alina but for the silence, for the absence of a father's presence in the worst year of his life. She felt it like a bruise. "Do you want to go to him?" she asked. He looked at her. The question had no agenda behind it. She meant it purely, and he could see that. "I do not know," he said. "Then sit with it," she said. "You do not have to decide tonight." He sat with it for 3 days. Then he told her he was going to Philadelphia. He told her this as if expecting argument. She said, "Of course you are. Let us figure out what needs to be arranged here before you go." He looked at her for a moment with an expression that was in his face sometimes, still, after 4 years of marriage, the look of a man who is not entirely used to being met without conditions. He was gone for 3 weeks. He wrote twice brief factual letters about travel and weather and his father's state, which was serious but not immediately mortal. She wrote back with detailed accounts of the children, and the ranch and the shop and Dusty Creeks accumulated small dramas, which she knew he would find grounding. William drew a picture of a horse that she included in the second letter. He came back on a Tuesday afternoon, thinner and quieter than he had left, with the particular quiet of someone who has processed a great deal of complicated emotion in a short time. He came into the kitchen where she was making supper and stood in the doorway for a moment, and she turned from the stove and looked at him and crossed the room and put her arms around him without saying anything. He held her for a long time. "He is very old," he said finally, "and ill, and he said he was sorry." Not in many words, but he said it. "Good," she said. "It does not fix 12 years, he said. "No," she said, "but it is something." "Yes," he said, "it is something." His father died the following spring. Andrew received the news without visible drama, which was his way, and was quieter than usual for about a week, and then came back to himself, and she thought that the trip to Philadelphia had given him something he had needed, the chance to put a period at the end of a sentence that had been hanging open for too long. He did not go back for the funeral. His brother came west instead, the following summer, a revelation Celia had not expected. His brother Richard was nothing like Andrew, talkative and expressive and delighted by everything about the West, and the two brothers sat on the ranch porch the first night of Richard's visit and talked for 3 hours, which was the most Andrew had talked at one stretch in all the years Celia had known him. She listened from the kitchen, doing nothing in particular, just listening to the sound of her husband talking to the only family he had left from before Texas. Richard stayed for 2 weeks and left with a standing invitation to return, and the following Christmas sent a package of gifts for the children that was so elaborate it required 2 trips from the post office. Andrew opened the card that came with it, read it, and said, "Richard," in a tone that was exasperated and fond in equal measure. The children grew. William at 6 was already following Andrew around the ranch with the focused determination of a boy who had decided what he was going to be and was simply waiting for the appropriate time. He had Andrew's deliberateness and Celia's curiosity, and he asked questions relentlessly about the cattle and the land and the water and the sky, with an intellectual hunger that she intended to feed every way she could. Clara at 4 was already the most popular child in the Sunday school, by force of personality rather than strategy, and had recently decided that she wanted to be a doctor, which she announced at supper one evening with complete finality. Andrew looked at this daughter of his across the table for a moment, and then said, "All right," as simply as if she had said she wanted to have seconds on the beans, and Celia loved him so hard in that moment that she had to look at her plate. Wildflowers had by 1884 become something beyond what Celia had imagined when she set up her table on the corner of Main Street and Harper Lane on that Tuesday morning 6 years ago. It was a proper business, with an employee and a steady clientele, and a reputation that extended to towns as far as 30 miles away. She had begun a small greenhouse operation behind the shop, growing flowers through the winter in a glass roof structure that Andrew had helped her design and build, and which allowed her to have blooms year-round rather than depending on seasonal gathering. She thought sometimes about Denver, the vague plan she had been heading toward when she had stopped in Dusty Creek for what she had intended to be a week. She thought about it the way you think about roads not taken, with the comfortable certainty that you are exactly where you are supposed to be. On a Tuesday morning in May of 1884, standing behind the counter of her shop in the early light, waiting for Alina to arrive and arranging a spring display of bluebonnets and yellow primrose, and the white asters from the hillside that she still gathered herself, twice a year, at dawn, she was aware of a deep and specific peace. The kind that is not the absence of difficulty or sorrow or complexity, because she had had those, they had had those, they would have more. But peace that comes from having built something real, something that holds. She heard the wagon in the street. Andrew came through the door with 2 cups of coffee, the way he had every morning for going on 4 years, and William was with him, home from school for the summer, and allowed 1 morning a week at the shop to help, which meant examining everything with great seriousness, and occasionally giving his mother his opinion on the arrangements. Andrew set the coffee down and looked at the display she was finishing. He picked up a bundle of bluebonnets from the remaining loose stems. She watched him hold them. She watched his face, which she knew by heart in every light. "You still buy flowers you do not need," she said. He looked at the bluebonnets and then at her. The almost smile settled into his features, older now, worn in comfortably, her favorite of all his expressions. "I find," he said, "that I need them quite a lot." William, from the back of the shop where he was inspecting the greenhouse, called out to ask whether the lemon verbena needed watering. Celia called back that it did. Andrew set the bluebonnets on the counter and drank his coffee and watched his wife and listened to his son, and outside the May morning moved across the dusty street of Dusty Creek, Texas, the same as it always had, unchanged and entirely different from what it had ever been before. There were more good years to come. William Thatcher grew into a young man with his father's height and his mother's dark eyes, and a mind for ranch management that would take over from Andrew in the natural order of things, when Andrew was ready to step back and not a moment before. Clara Thatcher grew into a fierce, bright, determined young woman who read every medical text available to her through the school and the new county library, and who would go east for formal education when she was old enough, with her parents' complete support and her father's quiet, undemonstrative but absolute pride. There was a third child, in 1886, a boy they named Frederick, who had Andrew's broad frame and Celia's laugh, and who was the easiest infant any of them had ever encountered, apparently having decided at birth that the world was acceptable and he intended to enjoy it. Andrew Thatcher was, by the late 1880s, a different man from the one who had walked down Main Street with bluebonnets hanging from his hand in July of 1878. Not fundamentally different. The bedrock was the same, the quiet, the directness, the high standards, the capability, but opened, the word that came to her whenever she tried to describe it to herself. Opened the way a house is opened in spring when you take the shutters down and let the air and light move through. He smiled more. Not constantly, not publicly, still only ever the almost smile in company and the real thing for her and the children, but more. He talked more, to her and eventually to others, and people who had known him for years remarked on it without quite being able to say what had changed. He had, one of the older ranchers said once at a county meeting, gotten some ease about him, and nodded at Celia across the room when he said it, as if she were known to be the source of this, which she supposed she was. He built the greenhouse with her. He drove the children to school on rainy days and picked them up when they were sick. He read in the evenings, which she had not known he did until she moved into the house and discovered a shelf of books in the back room that he had clearly been reading in solitude for years, history mostly and land law, and 1 volume of poetry so worn that it had been read to pieces, which he kept on the shelf in a condition of held-together devotion that she found unbearably touching. He fixed things. He fixed everything that broke, methodically and without being asked, and he asked her before he changed anything that was hers, and he gave her space to be angry when she was angry, and did not try to solve it or smooth it over, but waited at the edge of it the way she waited at the edge of his silences, understanding that some weather has to pass through. She loved him. She loved him in the morning with the coffee, and in the evening with the stars, and in the difficult weeks when he was too inside himself to reach, and in the seasons when the ranch demanded everything, and she saw him only at the edges of days. She loved him with the specific and durable love that is not about the arrival but about the staying, not about the grand gestures but about the morning coffee, and the hand on the table, and the flower stand built in the early September light of 1878, with a sign painted in careful, certain letters. Bell Flowers stood on the corner of Main Street and Harper Lane for the rest of the century and beyond, its sign repainted twice by Andrew and once, when she could no longer physically stop him, by William. The white asters came in from the hillside twice a year. The bluebonnets came every spring. The greenhouse produced through the winter. And every morning, for more years than she could count, Andrew Thatcher came through the door of that shop with 2 cups of coffee and bought at least 1 bundle of flowers that he did not need, and carried them home to the ranch house that had once been bare and cold, and was now full of curtains and rugs, and pressed flowers in frames and the noise of children and the smell of the kitchen in the morning, and set them in a glass on the kitchen table, and the table was never empty of flowers again. On the evening of their 20th wedding anniversary, November of 1898, Andrew sat with Celia on the ranch porch as the stars came out, the same way they had sat on this porch on 100 evenings across 20 years, and the children, all 3 of them grown now and present for the occasion, had gone inside after supper, giving their parents the evening. "Do you remember," Celia said, "when you came to my flower stand that first morning and told me the whole lot was not for sale and bought 1 bundle of bluebonnets and told me you did not need flowers?" "Yes," he said. "What were you thinking?" He was quiet for a moment, the long, considering silence of a man for whom silences had always been a form of speech. "I was thinking," he said finally, "that I had walked past a dozen flower stands in a dozen towns in 12 years and none of them had made me stop. And I was thinking that I did not know what to do with that information, but that it seemed important." She looked at the stars. "It was important," she said. "Yes," he said, and took her hand in the dark. "It was the most important thing." The night settled around them, quiet and full, the ranch and the town and the years arranged behind them like a country they had built together out of raw land and stubbornness and flowers and coffee, and the strange, lucky, life-faltering grace of a gruff man stopping at a corner flower stand in the August heat of 1878 and buying something he did not need, because something in him already knew that he did.